Hi, it's Dani again with another video in my series of knit tips. I wanted to talk about yarn that is made from different fibers. I had kind of referenced it in one of my earlier videos about gauge and yarn weights and stuff like that, and this just wanted to go over real quick about things like mohair, angora, and alpaca. Mohair, angora, and alpaca are three fibers that have what is considered a halo. And what that means is that the yarn is fuzzy. And in most merinos and wools and even silks and stuff, the yarn is, I have a yarn tangle here and it's angora, so it's sticking to itself, sorry. It's smooth, and so you can really kind of tell by looking at it what the gauge of the yarn is because you can see the thickness. Now, yarns with halos get a little bit more difficult, and I wanted to show you, this is an angora acrylic blend, and you can sort of see that it's fuzzy, and I put it against this card so you can kind of see the little fuzzy bits coming off of it. Now, this yarn itself, if you look at the string, the diameter of the string itself, it's pretty thin. But I knit a sweater out of this on size 10.5 needles. And it's a pretty dense fabric because that halo fills up the extra space because you're using a larger needle. And if you were knitting on a larger needle with that thickness of the actual string itself, it would look lacy, it would be full of holes. But when you're knitting with something with a halo like that, it fills in the extra space. So that's one of the instances in which the actual gauge, or when you go to do the wraps per inch, like I taught you, may not work for you because it's going to throw you off. Because if you knit on, and you certainly can knit on smaller needles with that, but it's going to be very, very dense because that halo is going to squish all up and it's going to get really fuzzy and really dense and really warm. That is the other thing about fibers with those halos, is that they tend to be very warm. Alpaca, mohair, angora, all very, very warm. Very soft, very luxurious. I love them, but very, very warm. The other thing about them, and I try to warn people this when they're working with this, especially new knitters, is that that halo, when you go to pull it out, tends to stick to itself. So you can end up with a giant knot if you're not very, very careful. So when you're knitting, I refer to knitting with mohair like doing the crossword puzzle and pen. There's very few mistakes to be made, because when you are working with a fiber that is that fuzzy, if you try to just frog it like you normally would, where you're just ripping, you're going to end up with mohair glue. I mean, it's just going to felt to itself, essentially, is what happens. And that can happen with other fibers as well. I've certainly had that happen with wool and even acrylic on occasion, though not usually, because I don't knit with acrylic unless I have to. But it can happen with other fibers, but it's especially common with mohair, angora, and alpaca. Now, I also wanted to address an issue that I have found after 2 years of selling yarn, both myself and in a local yarn shop. A lot of people say that they are allergic to wool. Wool allergies are actually very rare, and so a lot of times people don't like cheap wool or don't like scratchy wool. And there is a difference between an allergy and an intolerance. I mean, I say I'm allergic to acrylic. I'm allergic to cheap yarn. And so, not all acrylic is cheap yarn, I know, but I am a bit of a yarn snob, and I'm aware of that, and I own that. That is part of who I am. So, the thing to keep in mind when you are knitting for people who say that they have a wool allergy, and what I try to do is have them feel the fiber before I start knitting with it and put it up to their neck. Like, actually take the hank of yarn and put it next to their neck or next to their face and see how it feels. And a lot of times, if you don't tell them that it's wool, and it's a really good wool, they're like, oh, no, that's fine. So because now some people do genuinely have a wool allergy, which a lot of times is actually a lanolin allergy. It's the oil that's in the wool that they're allergic to. But people do actually have a wool allergy and can be very, very allergic. So it is important to try to ascertain whether they have a cheap wool intolerance or whether they have a legitimate wool allergy. Because certainly you wouldn't want to go rubbing wool on somebody with an actual wool allergy. Or sometimes if they insist that they have a wool allergy, maybe just the back of their hand to test it out, maybe not on their face. Maybe that was a bad thing. Now, mohair allergies are very, very common. A lot of people are allergic to mohair. I have no idea why, and I can't imagine living a life allergic to mohair because I love mohair. But and I feel just as badly for the people who are allergic to mohair as the people that are allergic to chocolate. I just cannot imagine my existence without mohair and chocolate. I would be just heartbroken. But those are things to consider. Now, the other thing is you can get wools with other blends in them. So you can get wools blended with silk, wools blended with bamboo, wools blended with soy silk, and those may also soften up the wool and make it a lot more tolerable to somebody who maybe doesn't like 100% wool or an itchy wool. Wool has gotten a lot better though too. A lot of people think that they have memories of wool from their grandmothers or their great-grandmothers, and it was very itchy wool because, you know, we hadn't developed all the tools that we have now to making wool nice and soft and fun. So those are some things to consider when you're knitting for other people or knitting for picky recipients. And the other thing is too, a lot of times if you felt it, it'll take away a lot of that itchiness. So if you're thinking of doing something felted, it'll probably be a lot softer. Things are also a lot softer after you wash them. So if it feels kind of itchy in the hank or even while you're knitting with it, try washing it. Do a swatch and try washing it and see how it feels once it's been washed. So I hope this has been helpful. And until the next time, happy knitting!